Before we get into stress testing Tesla's unsupervised robotaxis and my attempts at pushing them beyond their current limits, which I'm happy to report I think I did a pretty good job of doing, we have to answer the biggest question right now, which is this service even real in a meaningful way? Like, is it just the people with YouTube channels and influencers getting early access to this, or can everybody actually use this service whenever they want? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that I can 100% confirm that anyone, including brand new users, can go down to Austin, Texas, download the Robotaxi app, and will indeed have a chance at getting an unsupervised car. The bad news is that unless you know what you're doing and understand all the little nuances, your chances of getting one are basically zero. For now, at least. And to prove how tough it is, my friend David Moss took nearly 60 Robotaxi rides over the course of about a week trying to find an empty car, and the first 57 of them all had a safety monitor sitting in the passenger seat. And if you don't know David, he is the absolute legend that let his Model 3 drive him nearly 13,000 miles without any interventions, and was also the very first person to do a fully autonomous coast-to-coast drive across the US. And David is not a quitter. There's a saying that you learn more from your losses than your wins, or something like that, whatever. You know what I mean? The point is, after 57 rides, David finally seemed to crack the code, and rides 58 and 59 were both finally unsupervised. Here's some footage of both cars in the same lot, back to back with no one inside. Pretty awesome. Unfortunately, that was his last day there, but when he found out that I was flying in to do my own stress testing, he actually came back to teach me his methods and also help me get some of the awesome B-roll you're seeing now. So a huge shout out to David Moss. I can say for certain that without his 57 rides of trial and error, I wouldn't have had the time nor the knowledge to get these cars alone and test them the way I wanted to in order to truly push the limits. I'll dive deeper into the specifics about how to get an unsupervised ride a bit later, but for now, let's see what they can do. And before we get into my best attempts at breaking it, I just have to stop and reflect for a moment on what we're actually doing here. We are stress testing completely driverless, unsupervised Teslas that are relying entirely on vision using cameras only out in the real world. For years, so many people assured me this day would never come, and yet here we are. And yeah, right now it's only operating in a very small geofence within another geofence, and I definitely have some thoughts on why a wider rollout is probably going to take a bit longer, but spending so many hours sitting in the back seat as these cars drove me around were a pretty big perspective changer. It is pretty wild how quickly it becomes normal, especially seeing how it handled some more challenging scenarios. Like, there were so many edge cases I experienced that would have tripped up previous versions of FSD, like this construction worker signaling for us to run a stop sign and the car actually obeying, which was just absolutely wild, and so many other really cool moments that it handled way better than I was expecting, honestly. We'll dive deeper into more specific moments and areas that I think could use some improvements a little bit later, but I just had to comment on this historical moment for the channel. FSD finally got its driver's license. Now let's try to break it. In my first Robotaxi video, I tested things like opening the quote-unquote driver's door, which to my surprise actually did open, and it seems to be something the official Robotaxi account took note of, because this time the driver's door is locked from the outside at least, but you can still open it if you press the button from the inside, which I assume is there for safety reasons. And since there was no Tesla safety driver in the passenger seat to stop me, I got to try some next level shenanigans, like attempting to manually activate the turn signals and honk the horn, but seems like they've already thought about all this, and all the steering wheel functionality seems to be completely disabled on these unsupervised cars. And I just want to quickly address the people who left comments like this one on my last video who seemed very upset with me for testing these things. Did you forget what channel you're watching? You're talking to the guy who literally wrapped the front of his Model S in tinfoil to block the radar on one of the earliest versions of FSD beta, and then taped up the cameras one by one until it was blind just to see what would happen. Stress testing and shenanigans is kind of the whole point of this channel, and let's be real, when these unsupervised robotaxis actually roll out to the public on a massive scale, people are going to be doing a lot worse to these cars than trying to honk the horn. Speaking of which, another test I was excited to try again was placing an object in the windshield camera's blind spot to see if the car would recognize it. And if you remember last time, it was pretty clear that it wasn't using the front bumper camera. And that result wasn't super surprising to me because current versions of full self-driving running on customer cars aren't using that front bumper camera either, but I'm happy to report that it is being used in the unsupervised cars. You can see I tried using a much smaller object this time being my backpack instead of the carry-on, and the car decides to reverse, albeit rather kind of slowly and awkwardly. I mean, it definitely could have just reversed and gone around this object, but it instead decides to do a 3-point turn and kind of reroute to get out of here. And while this wasn't the most graceful of maneuvers that I've ever seen out of FSD, it kind of backed itself into a situation where it needed to do a multiple point turn here. At least it is starting to use that front bumper camera for object avoidance. At least that's what I thought, because for good measure, I decided to test it again in an even more challenging situation where the ground was shaded. And even though it obviously recognized that there was something there and backed up first, this happened. So maybe not completely solved quite yet. Watching it back at half speed, you can see it reverse and then start turning the steering wheel to go around it, but just doesn't turn quite enough. It also jabs the brakes right before making contact with the object, but as soon as it becomes out of view, it just keeps on going. I actually had to run out in front of the car because I was afraid it was just going to drag it to its next destination. Before moving on, I think it's important to point out a couple things. The first is that this is a blind spot for us humans as well, but we do have to hold FSD to a higher standard than us mere mortals, which is kind of why I do these tests. And two, my initial gut reaction when all this was happening was to run out in front of the car immediately to stop it, which is not something I would have done if there were a human behind the wheel. Anyways, still a lot to unpack regarding the overall robotaxi experience, including a few more unconventional stress test shenanigans I did, like seeing if it's actually possible to trick the unsupervised cars into leaving their designated geofence, which, spoiler alert, it is. And we'll dive into exactly how the car handled those things, but first, I want to take a brief moment to thank today's video sponsor, Delete Me. You know, I've come to really enjoy getting spam phone calls. Said no one ever. What you might not know is that those calls are not random. Data brokers are entire businesses whose only goal is to collect as much information about you as they possibly can and then sell it to the highest bidder. This includes information like your name, address, phone number, employers, and even your family members' information. And the scariest part is that pretty much anyone, including bad actors like scammers, can pay a few bucks and get access to all of it. That's where Delete Me comes in. They flip the script on these data brokers by demanding that your information gets removed, and they don't just do it once and call it a day. They continuously monitor these sites to make sure your data stays deleted. They also send regular privacy reports showing what specific information these companies have about you and what part of the removal process it's in. Using my link in the description or the QR code on the screen gets you 20% off all their consumer plans, which is a pretty great deal. A big thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video, and back to Robotaxi. I have to say, there's been a bit of a vibe shift with the whole Robotaxi program since I was out here. If you remember my video during the initial launch like 6 or 7 months ago, the energy was loud. Elon and the Tesla AI team were constantly posting about it, building up the hype, and they seemed to want people to know these cars were out there, and Tesla actually intentionally ran them with white interiors so that anybody glancing over would instantly see an empty driver's seat. But coming back now, things feel different. It's gone from "we're finally doing this" to stealth mode. There are still posts about it from official channels here and there, but nowhere near what it was before. And they swapped out all those flashy white seats for all black interiors like they don't want it to stand out at all. And I think mission accomplished, because I spent many hours in the backseat of robotaxis watching the drivers of other cars we passed, waiting for someone's jaw to drop, but in the end, no one really noticed. These cars have completely disappeared into everyday traffic, not only because of their dark interiors, but also because they're absolutely everywhere. And I don't mean unsupervised robotaxis specifically are everywhere, but Tesla-owned Model Ys seem to make up like 10% of the traffic around Austin when I was there, and it wasn't uncommon to pull up to a stoplight and have multiple in a row waiting at the intersection, or to just be driving along and seeing a bunch around. The weird thing is that these cars don't seem to be active in the robotaxi fleet, but the giveaway that Tesla owns them and they're being used for testing is the camera washers that normal production units don't have yet. You can see that as we pull up behind this totally inconspicuous Model Y, there are pretty obviously watermarks running down the liftgate from the rear camera washer, which normal production cars do not currently have, like I said. And another thing about these cars is that most of them were extremely dirty, like you're seeing here, while the in-service robotaxis were always very clean. I think that likely is Tesla doing their own version of stress testing on the camera washers. But anyways, the other reason these cars blend in so well on the road is just their driving behavior in general. There were so many little edge cases that I came across where I was like, surely it's going to have a tough time here and maybe get stuck, but every single time it just worked its way through the situation without fail. Like, the people standing there didn't even glance at the car because it did exactly what they expected it to do. And not only that, it seems to be able to predict when a situation might get a little dicey and just avoid it altogether. Like, you can see there's a semi truck backing up on this road and it immediately just pulls off to the side of the road at a very good distance and waits for the situation to play out before making any moves. And this might seem pretty mundane, but this is actually an area where all the other self-driving car competitors really struggle. They don't seem to understand the full context of a situation playing out and oftentimes put themselves into an even more difficult situation when it could have been entirely avoided by just kind of stopping and waiting for things to play out like the car did here. Not saying that robotaxi is perfect yet, but it definitely seems to be able to predict the future a little bit better than the other competitors right now. And speaking of better than the competitors, another area robotaxi shows its edge by being trained on actual real data is with hand signals. I know I already highlighted this clip in the intro, but definitely worth taking another look at. Knowing when it's okay to ignore a stop sign or go through a stoplight when instructed by a construction worker or police is another area that current self-driving cars don't do very well at. And I know some people are going to say, oh, it was just following the car in front, but the car in front was a robotaxi as well, so now what? All of this just to highlight how far full self-driving has come in these little nuanced situations. Responding to hand signals and gestures are not an easy task. I remember in some of my older videos talking through situations like that the car didn't handle nearly as well and explaining that I thought that would probably be one of the very last things that are solved. But with robotaxi, it seems to be solved pretty reliably. As we're making this left turn here, this gentleman waves us through and the car immediately proceeds without any hesitation at all. Like, you can see he never even stops moving towards the crosswalk. Just a simple gesture and the car knows what to do. Very impressive. All of this adds up to a car that nobody around seems to realize is driving itself, because that's kind of the entire point. It's just doing exactly what everybody around expects it to do. And I know a lot of you are already using later versions of FSD, so you already know this, but the way that it moves through traffic is just incredible. Like, because of the camera position, it was able to see this truck slowing down when I didn't have any idea what was happening. And the way that it's able to keep up forward momentum without doing anything dangerous or jerky is just seriously next level. The majority of the time, this thing is way smoother than any Uber I've ever been in. It seems to understand other drivers' intentions and doesn't unnecessarily slow down when it doesn't have to. And I think the biggest compliment that I could possibly give it is that it just feels like a good, smooth, safe human driver. Like, I expected after so many hours and so many rides of testing to catch at least a couple clips of the car interrupting traffic, but the only ones I found were humans doing it. So moving on from things that current versions of FSD are already pretty good at, I want to show you a couple of edge cases that really impressed me. We have a left turn to make at this next intersection, so we get into the left turn lane, but what you can't see is that the car in front of the line is not pulled up far enough to actually trigger the light to turn green. So we end up getting completely stuck here for multiple cycles of the light. I have this sped up something like 2,000%. We're sitting here for for a very long time. And then after about 3 minutes of staying still, a message appears on the screen saying that an issue has been identified and a resolution is in progress. Not sure if the car did this on its own or maybe a customer support rep did it, but after another minute or so of waiting, it cancels the turn signal and just reroutes to go straight through the light instead. And you can see that car off to the left is not nearly pulled up enough to trigger the light, and he's starting to move up now that people are passing him, but talk about an edge case. And here was another really tricky situation. We have a left turn to make at this next intersection, but construction was recently set up here. And although the construction is off to our right, they actually put the cones in the center here so that you're not able to make a left turn. I'm pretty sure this was set up incorrectly. You can see the car doesn't really have a way that it can make a left here. You can see the car nudging its way out and stopping, almost like it's thinking through what to do in this situation, because I honestly don't know what to do here either. And after a moment of waiting, it decides to turn right instead. But turning right here makes us approach a high-speed road that the unsupervised robotaxi is not allowed to drive on right now. You can see the hazards turn on and a message appear on the screen saying that the vehicle is finding a safe place to pull over. So this message on the screen is what appears whenever the car leaves its geofence or starts to go on roads that it's not allowed to drive on. You're going to see a little bit more of that later, but the message remains on the screen as the car is looking for a place to pull over and driving slowly down the street with the hazards on, and it ends up turning right on this road, which immediately apparently puts it back within the geofence. And going this way is going to put us back onto the same street we started from, where it's probably going to have to deal with that same construction zone again. And I thought there was a chance that this could turn into an infinite loop, because there's been a few moments in my car in situations like this where it'll just keep going around and around. But surprisingly, this time Robotaxi decides to reroute and go a completely different way and avoid that intersection altogether. This is definitely some next level functionality that we do not currently have on consumer versions of full self-driving, but very cool to see. And now that we've seen some pretty impressive moments, it's time to start getting into the not so impressive moments and where Robotaxi could use some work. Also, just have to mention, this guy pulling out here was one of the very few people who realized that nobody was driving the car and just kind of stopped in awe and stared at it for a second. Anyways, this parking lot was one that I visited several times during my trips with Robotaxi, and most of the time it handled it great, but other times it would do what you're seeing here and just kind of seem to get lost in the parking lot and go around in circles. Like, it's doing a lot of extra maneuvers here that it really doesn't need to do, and it never actually got itself completely stuck. It always managed to work its way out, but it's just strange how inconsistent it seems to be. And that inconsistency goes beyond just parking lots as well. There were a few specific corners that I noticed where sometimes it would handle them absolutely perfectly. Like you can see here, we're turning left, no awkwardness on the steering wheel, gets into the proper lane, no problem at all. Then it would do that same exact turn on another ride, but seem to get completely lost. You can see the nervousness in the steering wheel, and it's driving over an area it probably shouldn't be. And these things just seem to happen every once in a while. Like, for example, here our navigation route has us turning left at the stoplight. We're supposed to be following the cyber cab in front of us, but it randomly just decides to turn down one street too early. The good news is that it always seems to work itself out, but it does seem to put itself into situations like here where it has to make an unprotected left turn that really wasn't necessary. Like, all it had to do was follow the navigation route and it would have had a nice, easy, protected left turn instead. There was also a couple of moments where it seemed to just change its mind about the route that it wanted to take. You see it's getting into the left turn lane here and kind of goes, nah, I think I'll go another way instead. Like, feels kind of eerily human sometimes, at least until you take a closer look at the route that it changed to. Like, what the heck is even that? Which brings me to what is by far the weakest link for not only Robotaxi, but also full self-driving in general: navigation and maps. And I think there is no better example of the state of Tesla maps than this clip right here. Literally all we have to do is continue straight along this road to get to our destination, but Tesla Maps thinks it has a better idea. You can see instead of just following traffic and going straight ahead, it decides the best way to get there is to turn left into this neighborhood. And not only does this add additional time to the trip, but it also has to do multiple unprotected turns and puts itself into a bit more of a dangerous situation. Like, this unprotected left here is pretty sketchy. And sure, it can handle it, but it's just pretty frustrating that it put itself into this situation at all when there was a much simpler and safer way to complete that route. And I guess there's a couple different ways that you can look at this. On one hand, I find it completely unacceptable that there are still glaring mapping issues like this, especially in an area where Tesla has so much data. I mean, they have cars everywhere around here, and with such a small geofence that they can drive in, you'd think they could get the maps figured out, but I also kind of view that as a positive, because they could easily game the system and make maps absolutely perfect here, but they haven't done that. And call me crazy, but there's something rather comforting knowing that Robotaxi is struggling with some of the same things my own personal car struggles with. It gives me hope that they aren't focusing on just this one specific area, and they're trying to fix it with a more generalized solution. Or I hope so, at least. Something else I figured out after a lot of trial and error is that with a well-timed reroute, you could make it skip certain turns and get the car to go to places it normally wouldn't go. Like, for example, in this parking lot, I have it heading to the back loading docks. This wasn't super consistent and was kind of hard to repeat, but I did end up getting it to drive to places it probably normally wouldn't have. I was really hoping it would just keep driving along here, but unfortunately it does get a little bit spooked. Doesn't seem to think that it can fit under there, which it probably could have in all honesty, and decides to just do a multiple point turn to get it headed back in the direction that it came in from, which honestly isn't too bad of an idea. But I just love these weird edge case scenarios because I feel like I can really feel the car thinking through these situations. And as I hinted at earlier in the video, I actually used this technique to get the car to drive out of its geofence a couple of times. Like, the app only allows you to pick the closest spot of this park to get dropped off at, but if you cancel it and navigate to a new point and it misses its turn, it'll just keep on driving along, and you can see that same message appears on the screen just like before. But this time, instead of just continuing on its own and figuring it out, it actually does just stop in the middle of the road here and then call rider support. And after coming to a complete stop, the message on the screen changes to suggest that the ride will end once I get out. And since I didn't want to get out, I decided to just talk to rider support and see if they could help me get out of this situation. This actually ended up taking a lot longer than I was expecting, but in the end, they were able to get me going again. Looks like we're off again.
Okay. Yes. Is there anything else I can help you with?
Nope, that's it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too. But as it drove us deeper and deeper into this park, the same message ended up displaying on the screen again and the hazards turned on. And even though the message stayed the same and said that it was looking for a place to pull over, it wasn't actually looking for a place to pull over this time and continued driving further and further out of bounds until we reached the very end of the park, and the navigation route finally updated to bring it back within the geofence, and then finally the message disappeared and it went back into normal self-driving mode. And after this, there wasn't really any more drama. It just drove itself back to the destination that I set in. But what I did notice is that whenever I got close to being out of the geofence, these black Model Ys with two people would show up. And I know you're probably thinking, man, AI driver has completely lost his mind. He's getting real paranoid now. But I do have some more evidence. So I decided to go back to that same park since I knew it was having some trouble there, and did the same reroute thing so that it skipped the drop-off point and just drove deeper and deeper into the park. And in this instance, I came from a completely different entrance to the park and it didn't seem to have any problem. Even though we're technically driving in areas that aren't able to be selected for drop-off, it had no problems driving here and never displayed the message saying it was going to pull over or something. But we are very close to the geofence, and look who decides to show up yet again. Could I just be paranoid? Maybe. But I think it's more likely that these are the people who rescue the cars when they get stuck, just like Waymo and other self-driving companies have. Anyways, I tried that rerouting method in a couple more spots on the edge of the geofence, and although I did get that pulling over message to pop up a few times, but in most of my attempts, the message would just instantly go away and the car would just be happy driving, even though this is technically well beyond any drop-off point that you're able to select. So yeah, not really sure what the trigger is to make it want to phone home and call for help, but sometimes it did and other times it didn't. We're gonna have to speed run the rest of this video because I just realized how long it's getting. So you're in Austin, Texas. How the heck do you get an unsupervised robotaxi? Well, first you have to realize that the robotaxi program is likely changing all the time, and the information that I'm about to give you is probably going to be outdated by the time you get there. But I'll give you the tricks that I used. First is that your pickup and drop-off point have to be within the original robotaxi geofence, not the current geofence, but the original one when it first launched. And I don't know the exact schedule that they run, but I only was able to get them between the hours of 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Please keep in mind this is likely changing all the time. I also had the most luck choosing very short trips, so I'd choose trips that are probably like only 5 or 10 minutes away. Then once you're in an unsupervised robotaxi, you can change the destination a couple times and get a little bit more seat time with it, but start with a short trip. Another thing you have to do is be extremely fast in the app. There were several times where it said there was a robotaxi available like 30 minutes away or 20 minutes or high service demand, but for a split second, for maybe literally like 2 or 3 seconds, it would show one available within just a few minutes away and then instantly disappear. If you're quick enough to book one of those, it's likely going to be unsupervised. No idea why they flicker in and out of existence. If it's on purpose, maybe Tesla's doing it for just this trial period or something, but it is something I noticed. One trick David had up his sleeve that helped me tremendously was that he wrote down the license plates of all 57 robotaxi trips that he went on that were supervised. You are able to see the license plate of the car that's about to pick you up in the robotaxi app, so if it's one that David had already been in, we would just cancel it and rebook until we got a new license plate. There is a website that you can find called robotaxitracker.com that you can go to actually get the specific license plates of the unsupervised cars, and you can always just go off that list and just keep rebooking until you get one of those plates. But the problem with that is it's not always up to date. I was actually cycling between 2 different robotaxis one day, and there was posts online saying that nobody had seen an unsupervised robotaxi for days and it was all a sham, and it was just kind of funny. And you also won't have the chance to discover new plates. Like when David and I were out there, we discovered 2 new license plates that got added, and I think Dirty Tesla went out there and the very first ride that he got was not discovered either. So it's probably the coolest game of Pokemon you can play right now. So in summary, told you we were speedrunning. The real question is Tesla's unsupervised robotaxi service ready to expand to the masses? And I think the answer to that is pretty clear, because if it was ready, they would have expanded it. There are issues I pointed out in this video that I think need to be addressed before a super wide rollout is feasible. And I think that's probably why Tesla is rolling it out in this way, because they don't know what they don't know. But also credit for where it's due. There was never a single situation that made me feel the slightest bit unsafe, and I also didn't manage to get the car stuck a single time, which definitely wasn't from a lack of trying. Thank you guys so much for watching. I truly do appreciate it, and until next time.